Hello, church. Hope you're doing well today as we dive into Bible in 1 year. My name is Trent Miner, and I'm the student pastor at Church of the Front Range. And today we're going to be looking at Ezekiel chapters 19 through 22. And as I was spending time in Ezekiel, and it's such an incredible book that is full of so much dramatic imagery of basically the impending things that have been going on with Israel and Judah and the impending doom that's coming because of their disobedience to God. And as I was just diving into these chapters, I looked into chapter 19 and I was drawn to a couple of questions just in my time with the Lord. Some of the questions that were kind of stirring in me was questions like, when was the last time I actually lamented with what God laments after? When did I truly grieve something that grieves the heart of God? Obviously, the key focus of chapter 19 is this lament. Ezekiel is actually experiencing this lament that God has, and this grief, his sorrow he's experiencing over God's own people, his own kids turning their back on him. This word lament is such a powerful word that is full of imagery, and as a noun, it's actually a passionate expression of grief or sorrow. And as a verb, it's to mourn. Almost like mourning a person's a loss of something or a death of something. We see Ezekiel, he's actually experiencing this true lament of God. He's experiencing God's heart and the sorrow that God is experiencing for truly his kids that have just turned his backs on him time and time again. And the whole lament is really a stark recognition of failure, both of the kings of Israel and Judah and of the people. What God has made prosperous had languished and finally withered through the people's disobedience to God's covenant with them. I actually like how the end of chapter 19 ends. It says, this is a lamentation and will be for a lamentation. Such an interesting way of putting it, but I believe this is actually like a really suitable way of ending because, all the chapters from chapters 12 to 19, we see this seasons of, lamentation that is going on. And constantly we see this depiction of Israel and Judah and just this constant failure that's going on, that they constantly are failing to respond to God's goodness and his gracious love for them time and time again. And now, and all the kings that they have put in place, they are failing time and time again. And now all that remains is truly in this moment, lamentation. All that remains is lamentation, a grieving for the failures of the Israelites' kings, and whom such they had put so much hope in. They put all this hope in these kings as opposed to God, and because of that, and just the failure would just continue to happen. I think about this, and like a parent who grieves the loss of a child going wayward, God laments that his kids have put their hope in other things than him. God is in his sorrow and his mourning. He mourns over our disobedience. He laments that. God laments with us so we can participate in the lament of God. I think as I'm kind of spending time with the Lord too, when I think about lament and this deep grief and sorrow that is going on, I think I have to ask myself some questions and honest questions about, what I'm experiencing and if I'm really experiencing some of that lament that God goes through with us and towards people going wayward or disobeying him. Are we allowing ourselves to lament with God's heart over all the injustices we see around us? Are we, do we believe God laments over those things? Because I do. I truly believe God laments over the injustices that are done in this world. Are we crying out to God in prayer in this deep grief and sorrow, asking God to forgive us for the ways that we have worshiped other things before him, a faithful God? Are we repenting on behalf of those around us, saying, God, I'm so sorry on behalf of just a church that constantly is choosing other things at times that is not pointing to you, that's constantly, putting their identification, their identity into other things that are not of you. Are we lamenting over that? Are we allowing the grief of our Father to take a hold of our hearts so we are deeply moved by his heart for a broken, fallen world? I believe that when we actually lament, friends, when we actually do this and we spend lament and time and we actually experience the lament that the Lord has towards a broken and fallen world, that this moves us to prayer and it moves us to action. And it's not just, wanting, we are actually moved to a place of, I don't want one person to perish. I don't want one person to spend an eternity apart from God. I want to tell people about Jesus. I'm going to pray for them without ceasing. I want to be a part of what God is doing because I'm experiencing this grief. Because truly, we should be grieving at even the fact that people will spend eternity apart from God. Like, if we're not grieving on that, like, what are we doing? We need to be grieving in that and saying, no, this is not okay, Lord. I am so sorry. Oh, this is such a terrible thing that is going on in our world around us. These injustices, people are spending eternity apart from you. People are trying to find satisfaction in things that are not of you. And it's like, man, God, I'm grieving with you. I'm lamenting with you. I'm so sorry for those things. I'm sorry for the ways I participated in those things. And God, I want to bring more and more people to you, the real God, a true God that loves them, a God that is faithful. Because God was faithful to the Israelites even when they were disobedient to him, and he chose to be faithful to them and to run after them. And so I believe that, there's something for us here that it's like, how are we lamenting? How are we grieving with the heart of God? Because he does grieve for these things. He grieved for his people, the Israelites. He grieved for them turning away from him. And I know that God wants to turn our hearts to a place of lament that actually turns us to prayer and to action and to turning people to him, a God that is faithful and loves them dearly. So I just pray that I know it's like it can be a little bit dreary with lamentation and lament, but I believe it's such an important thing for us to sit in with God so that we grieve for the things that God grieves for, that we will actually lament with what God laments after. I pray you have a great rest of your day, friends.